Hello and welcome to another episode of Judge of Character. As always, I'm your host, Steve. You know, the primary reason I started this show was as a sort of celebration of fictional characters and everything they do for us. Fictional characters give us more than I think we give them credit for. They're the avatars for our adventures in fiction, the ones we connect with in the stories. Whether they be villain or hero, characters give us a connection to the story being told that we really can't find in many other places. Movies, books, video games, they all give us passage into a world we might not otherwise see, with the help of people we might not otherwise meet. Everyone has a favorite character, whether it be from a book, a movie, a TV show, etc. A character that just fits us, a character that we connect with. Tonight we're going to be looking at one of my absolute favorite characters. Ladies and gentlemen, let's learn more about Tintin. I'm going to shoot that editor. Tintin is the main character of The Adventures of Tintin, a comic series written by Hergé that premiered in 1929 and has seen countless adaptations in multiple media and is one of the more influential comics seen in the 20th century. Tintin has had an influence on both people and animation in general. Andy Warhol even cited Hergé's artwork in Tintin as an influence on his own work, both artistically and politically. And now that I mention it, I can see it. Now, I'm willing to bet money that not a lot of you know who Tintin is, and I'll bet even more money that even fewer of you really care. Well, hopefully tonight's episode will change that, and you'll find yourself a new character to enjoy. And maybe even change your opinion about a comic that's been around for years. So, who is Tintin, and why is he a memorable character? In 1929, a Belgian cartoonist by the name of Georges Prosper Remy, known today by his pen name of Hergé, was working at a Belgian newspaper based in Brussels when he created the character of Tintin, a boy reporter who traveled the globe with his pet dog Milou, who American audiences know as Snowy. The first adventure, Tintin in the Land of the Soviets, was published in January of 1929 as part of a serial that ran until May 1930. Ah, there's that word serial again. The popularity of Land of the Soviets led to a second adventure, titled Tintin in the Congo, which saw Tintin heading to the Belgian Congo to report on happenings there, only to uncover a diamond smuggling operation run by legendary crook Al Capone. Again, the adventure was immensely popular, leading to the third published serial, Tintin in America, where Tintin deals with the aforementioned Capone while also dealing with Blackfoot Native Americans. Ah, yeah, I kind of forgot about that. Okay. There's some controversy in the earlier issues, mainly dealing with elements of racism and fascism. In fact, the adventure Tintin in the Congo has a tendency to depict the Congolese as, well... yeah, that. Listen, you have to realize that at the time all this was going on, this sort of behavior was considered acceptable. In fact, the newspaper that Hergé was working for at the time was a very staunch Catholic and conservative paper, so naturally Hergé was oftentimes forced to make depictions that aren't exactly flattering. And yes, there's a panel where Tintin drills a hole into a rhino and blows it up with TNT. I swear to God, it gets better. Why? Because the Nazis show up! Wait, what? Yes, in May of 1940, Nazi Germany invaded Belgium. Hergé fled, but eventually returned and began working at Le Soir, another newspaper that was allowed to work during wartime under German management. Because Hergé could no longer explore the political aspects of the world, lest he be locked up by the Gestapo, Tintin was changed from a reporter to an explorer, a change that has since stuck. After a lapse that occurred at the end of World War II, when Hergé found himself out of work, Tintin returned to the pages in 1946 in his own comic magazine where his adventures would continue to be published until Hergé's death in 1983. But just because Hergé died doesn't mean Tintin could be stopped. By the time of Hergé's death, Tintin was immensely popular all over Europe. How popular? Well, when Raiders of the Lost Ark premiered in 1981, many European reviews compared Indy to Tintin. And that comparison would lead to an adaptation many, many years later, but we'll get to that. So what is it about Tintin that's made him popular for all these years? As always, let's start with the personality. Tintin is actually a very common individual, at least as far as personality goes. He doesn't have some dark past that we know of, he's not some obvious badass or anything like that. He's just a kid. Or a young adult. The comic and adaptations were never really clear on that. In fact, Tintin, in all honesty, is kind of bland. There's nothing really exciting about his persona other than that he's very bright and determined. He's a blank page, essentially. Now, this isn't actually a bad thing. It actually serves a purpose. It allows the reader to sort of insert themselves into the story through the hero. It allows them to live out the adventures that they're reading about instead of just reading about them. It's actually a very common literary technique. This is a good example. For a bad example...
Well, I don't really like the rain. Any cold, wet thing, I don't really...
I'm not looking forward to that episode. Despite this apparent blandness to the character, Tintin is actually well written. He's intelligent and resourceful, able to pull off indie ploys as well as, well, indie. He knows several languages, is skilled at using several different kinds of vehicles, including a tank, and is capable of tangling with big bad guys and knocking them flat on their ass. Wait a minute. An exotic name, improbable skills, nearly perfect. This sounds like... a Mary Sue! Or is it? Yeah, admittedly Tintin does have some Mary Sue elements. However, in this case, those elements can be overlooked, as the Adventures of Tintin isn't as much about Tintin as much as they're about, well, the adventures. Tintin just takes part in them, and he's the hero, so here we're able to overlook them for the most part in favor of enjoying the stories. But is that it? Of course not. Despite being a simple character, Tintin actually does offer a lot more than at first glance. In fact, let's take a closer look at some of those skills of his. As I said earlier, Tintin is intelligent and very resourceful, able to come up with plans on the fly. Hell, in one scene in the film, Tintin manages to escape from the ship he's held captive on with some wood, rope, and a bunch of wine bottles, fooling his captors into thinking he had a gun. And his intelligence isn't limited to just coming up with plans to beat the bad guys. Being a reporter, Tintin has extensive knowledge in a number of subjects, from mountain climbing to foreign languages, all of which he uses over the course of his adventures. There's a moment in Prisoners of the Sun where Tintin uses his knowledge of astrology and a handy newspaper to fool his Incan captors into believing that he could control the sun by commanding it to darken and reappear, all during a very handily timed eclipse. See? It pays to be a nerd. But don't think just because he's smart, Tintin can't take care of himself. There's been numerous moments throughout the series where Tintin has had to go toe-to-toe with some big ol' lugs, and almost every time, Tintin has come out on top. Not bad for a teen reporter. While Tintin is more likely to use his brains against his enemies, he has no issue with resorting to some good old fisticuffs, thus making him a good old-fashioned badass. But no one gets by on pugilism alone. Thankfully, however, Tintin has a lot of more positive aspects to his personality to balance it out. While Tintin is a badass, he's easily one of the friendliest ones you'll ever meet. Tintin's friendly nature, along with his idealism, has been the cause of more than one adventure in their own right. Perhaps one of the best examples of this is the adventure Tintin in Tibet, easily one of the most dramatic adventures Tintin's ever been on. In it, Tintin and his friend Captain Haddock are on vacation in the Alps when Tintin learns that his old friend Chang Chong Chen has been in a plane crash in the Tibetan mountains. After having a dream of Chang calling out to him, Tintin decides to head to Tibet and rescue his friend, whom he's convinced is alive. Over the course of the adventure, we see how devoted Tintin is to his friends, refusing to stop as long as there's a chance that Chang is alive. It even happens to others. At a critical point, Haddock and Tintin seem to be in a hopeless situation, and the only solution seems to be for Haddock to sacrifice himself. Haddock doesn't even hesitate, he just pulls out the knife and starts cutting the rope. While it obviously didn't come to it, the fact that Haddock was so willing to sacrifice himself to ensure Tintin's safety should be proof enough that he sees Tintin as a true friend. These elements, by themselves, are more than enough to show that Tintin's a great character. But Tintin isn't the only reason these adventures have become as great as they are. Over the years of publication, Tintin has been on every sort of adventure you can think of, from America to Tibet to even the freaking moon. Seriously, Tintin went to the moon a good 15 years before Armstrong landed there. In every adventure, Tintin has dealt with all sorts of individuals and seen an amazing number of things. He's been captured by natives, almost executed, and almost died in space. Through it all, Tintin has remained his usual stoic self, always determined to see it through to the end. Now, the comics aren't the only way of interacting with Tintin. The stories have all been adapted into every medium imaginable, even radio, The stories have all been translated into over 70 different languages, and the comics themselves have sold over 200 million copies. Needless to say, if you want to experience the adventures of Tintin, you're not lacking in options. Easily the two most well-known adaptations are the second animated series released in 1991 and the recent animated film released in 2011. Of the two, the animated series, which was produced by Ellipse and Nelvana, is likely the more remembered for a variety of reasons. The biggest one is the accuracy. The series adapted 21 of the Tintin books with such detail that often whole panels from the original comics were transposed into the cartoon. Everything about the character of Tintin is here, his resourcefulness, loyalty, and even his intelligence. On top of all that, the series was renowned for having one of the most awesome soundtracks for a cartoon. Don't believe me? Here, just watch the opening. Roll the footage! See? Even I can't help but smile when that opening plays. But what about the movie? Does it hold up to the same level of scrutiny? I'll admit, when I heard that they were going to make a movie based on Tintin, I was less than enthusiastic. All I could think was that they were going to ruin it. Even the fact that the movie was being made by Peter Jackson and Steven Spielberg wasn't enough to assuage my worries. Turns out I had nothing to worry about. It's plainly obvious that this movie was made by fans of the comics. Spielberg and Jackson did their damnedest to ensure that fans of Tintin wouldn't be disappointed, and they succeeded. It's obvious within the first minute that the two have gone out of their way to keep the film as close to the original tone of the comics as possible, including numerous panels and call-ups to the comics in the opening credits. In addition, the film is full of people who are fans of Tintin, from the actors to the crew. While it does have a few flaws, they're few and far between and rarely get in the way of the film. So it's definitely one I'd recommend for newbies wanting to get in on Tintin. So in the end, what makes Tintin a memorable character? Bottom line, Tintin is a simple character, but it's a simplicity that works. What makes Tintin memorable isn't that he's a complicated character. He's an ordinary guy doing extraordinary things we might never get to do, and it's through Tintin that we get to enjoy those adventures. I mean, honestly, how many of us are gonna get to go to space? His personality is the kind that we'd like to emulate. The kind of character that shows us we can do anything we set our minds to. And that, to me, is more than enough to make a character like Tintin a great memorable one. If you're interested in getting involved in the adventures of Tintin, I highly recommend you either check out the 91 animated series or the 2011 movie, both of which can be found on Netflix. They're great stories that are just too good to be passed up. Go forth and enjoy! I'm your host Steve, reminding all of you, stay in character.